When we think about the most influential empires in human history, there is one that immediately springs to mind: the Roman Empire. Lasting for over 1,800 years, the Romans were a major player on the world stage, and their influence can still be seen today in our language, our law, and even our architecture. But what was life like in Rome? Let's find out. Rome wasn't built in a day, but it was built pretty quickly in terms of ancient cities. According to legend, Rome was founded in the year 753 BC by Romulus, who killed his twin brother Remus after the two of them were raised by a she-wolf. Yeah, it's weird to think about now, but back then it was totally normal for people to have animal moms. Anyway, Romulus went on to become the first king of Rome, kicking off 7 centuries of monarchy in the city. This period of time would see Rome grow from a small village into a massive city, but it was also rather unstable with frequent power struggles and foreign invasions. The Etruscan kingdom of Veii was Rome's biggest rival during this time, but it was eventually destroyed by the Romans in 390 BC. This expansionism would soon cause problems, however, as Rome found itself at war with its former ally, Carthage. The First Punic War kicked off when the two powers fought over control of Sicily. The Romans won control of the island after a 3-year conflict, but it would be the next war that saw Rome emerge as a major power in the Mediterranean. The Second Punic War began when Hannibal Barca, one of the greatest generals in history, led his army across the Alps and into Italy. Though he won several battles against the Romans, he was ultimately defeated at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. As a result, Carthage lost most of its territory and had to pay a massive indemnity to Rome, which basically bankrupted the city. The last Punic War was short and sweet, with Rome easily defeating Carthage and destroying the city in 146 BC. With all of its rivals either conquered or bought off, Rome was ready to take over the Mediterranean, though not everyone was happy about this. As the Republic grew in size and power, so did the gap between the rich and poor. While the elite class lived lives of luxury, most Romans lived in poverty and didn't have enough food to eat. This tension between the classes would only grow in the following centuries, setting the stage for the rise of the empire. In the late 1st century BC, Rome came under the control of a series of powerful generals, starting with Marius, then Sulla, then Pompey. But it was Julius Caesar who truly embodied the image of the Roman dictator. He built roads, aqueducts, public buildings, and even public bathrooms. In addition to expanding the Republic into modern-day Belgium, Switzerland, Denmark, and France. But Caesar's massive power worried many senators, especially his rival Pompey. And in 44 BC, a group of senators assassinated Caesar. Unfortunately for them, Caesar had designated his adopted son Octavian as his heir. So, after defeating Pompey's sons at the Battle of Actium in 32 BC, Octavian became the first emperor of Rome, beginning the era of the empire. He took the title Augustus and ushered in a new period of peace and prosperity known as the Pax Romana. This lasted for 2 centuries and saw the empire reach its greatest territorial extent. Under the rule of Trajan in 98 AD, the empire stretched from Britain to Saudi Arabia and from Portugal to Uzbekistan. During this time, Rome's population grew to an estimated 1 million people, making it the largest city in the world. Also, the Roman army was at its peak, consisting of 30 legions and 30,000 auxiliary troops. By the end of the 1st century, however, the empire began to experience a series of crises. Starting with the year of the 4 emperors in 69 AD, followed by the Great Fire of Rome in 80 AD, the empire seemed to be falling apart. But under the Flavian dynasty, Rome was rebuilt and the crisis was averted. The next century would see the empire face yet another major challenge, the Bar Kokhba revolt in Judea. The Romans were victorious, but the damage was done and the Jews were banned from ever revolting again. In 135 AD, the Emperor Hadrian came to power and ushered in a golden age of prosperity and stability. During his reign, the empire experienced a population boom, growing to an estimated 5 million people by 180 AD. He reformed the law, built roads, temples, public baths, and even his own mausoleum. But despite all of these accomplishments, he is best remembered for one colossal mistake. After visiting Egypt, he decided to turn the province into a Roman territory, which resulted in a massive rebellion led by the priestess of Isis, Julia Mesa. Although the revolt was eventually put down, the damage was done, and Egypt would never be the same again. The Severan dynasty tried to restore order to the empire, but they had their hands full dealing with the Jewish-Roman War and the rise of Christianity. By 235 AD, the empire was on the verge of collapse. Over the next century, Rome was sacked twice and the imperial court was chased as far away as Persia. But things got even worse in the 3rd century with the crisis of the 3rd century. A series of 25 emperors ruled for short periods of time, and the empire was rocked by civil wars, plagues, and invasions. But it was the reign of Diocletian that saved Rome from total annihilation. He reformed the government, reorganized the military, and stabilized the economy. After 20 years of ruling, he retired and the empire was passed to his co-emperor, Maximian. Now, officially, this was a peaceful transition of power. But let's be real here. It was probably more like Game of Thrones than The Crown. This division of the empire into East and West would continue for another 200 years until the Western Roman Empire was finally conquered by the Germanic tribes in 476 AD. Even though the eastern half of the empire survived for another 1,000 years, the traditional end date of the Roman Empire is 476 AD. This means that the Roman Empire lasted for almost 1,500 years, which is longer than any other empire in history. The question is, how did they do it? Well, the Romans had a number of advantages that helped them to succeed. First, they had a highly centralized government that was able to effectively collect taxes, build infrastructure, and raise an army. Second, the Roman language, Latin, was a lingua franca, meaning that it was widely understood throughout the empire. Third, the Romans were highly adaptable and were able to absorb new ideas and technologies from the cultures around them. Finally, the Roman Empire was vast and diverse, which gave it a large pool of resources and manpower to draw from. However, it was also this diversity that ultimately led to the empire's downfall, as the eastern and western halves became increasingly disconnected from one another. So, what was life like in Rome? Life in the Roman Empire was both amazing and terrible. On the one hand, Rome was the cultural and intellectual capital of the ancient world. It was home to some of the greatest works of art and architecture ever created. In addition, the Romans had access to all of the goods and services that the empire had to offer, including free entertainment, cheap food, and excellent public services. On the other hand, most Romans were poor and lived in squalor. They were constantly at risk of being arrested for a variety of vaguely defined crimes, and their lives were often cut short by disease, war, or famine. Ultimately, life in the Roman Empire was a bit like living in a modern metropolis. There were great things about it, but it was also full of danger and uncertainty. We hope you enjoyed this whirlwind tour through the history of the Roman Empire. If you want to learn more about ancient Rome, check out the links in the description below. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.